just judging the process of some of these things, that Kyle Shanahan's night wasn't as bad as it seemed. Patrick Mahomes' night was as good as it seems. That's the way I look at this, is that you can usually play that way. You can make mistakes, some are, some aren't, or you could put it in the hands of your quarterback and expect him on 2nd and 5 to get you a completion when he's a 70% completion guy. Or you could hope that your defense, that was one of the best in the league, arguably number 1 defense in the entire league, to stop the other team's quarterback when you're up 10. But this quarterback is just different.
It's a different world, man.
Different.
It's a different world. And they could adjust to what San Francisco was trying to do pretty quickly. I loved, I think I read this morning, I loved the adjustment. So wisely, the 49ers started the game with Sherman on Kelsey. And the Chiefs are like, oh, okay, forget this. They slide Kelsey inside to become basically a blocker and say, okay, Richard, who are you going to cover now? So, yeah, I mean, the Chiefs, if you look at what Reed and Bieniemy and that offensive staff does quickly, it's impressive. But you're right. This comes down to one thing, and that is a quarterback who, in the face of not playing great, says, I don't really care. I'm fine. And that's why when you get these opportunities at combines and Senior Bowls to sit down with these kids, that you have to delve down to find out the mentality, right? I mean, we're watching this throw right now, and Patrick Mahomes makes that deep throw to Hill like it's nothing.
Yes.
I mean, it's a hell of a throw.
I had this thought last night when he makes that play, because you're talking about the combine, and I think there's some value to getting a quarterback in a room and seeing what he knows and have an idea of what you're getting yourself into. How far along is he? How much do you have to teach him about NFL football, which I'm sure Mahomes, you probably had to teach a lot after he was at Texas Tech and was just running around and throwing all over the place, that he probably had to be taught a lot of structure. And he thanked Alex Smith last night for helping him get to be better at understanding the game. And I know it's delicious that he did that, but also classy, I thought, because Alex Smith could have been a total jerk to him, and he wasn't, from my understanding. He was really great to him. But what I look at, if you're scouting your college players in general, and this goes for someone like Tyrann Mathieu too, if you want a truly special player who's going to change your franchise, like Patrick Mahomes, you have to look for guys who did stuff in college and even high school that was just unreal. Like what Tyrann Mathieu did at LSU, even though he got thrown out of LSU, was unbelievable. He's one of the most exciting college players. They would put him at kick return, at punt return. He would get picks like crazy. He just had this next level type of understanding of the game and this freakish ability to spot route combinations and things like that in college. And he was a college legend, like right there. And the same thing with Patrick Mahomes. His numbers in college are preposterous. In like 13 games, he was throwing for over 5,000 yards, and he had every bit the NFL arm. It wasn't like a Tebow situation where he just couldn't actually throw it. Sure. It was a university that didn't have superstar receivers or anything else like that. And what he did was just straight up legendary. And so when I look at this draft and I think about it through the eyes of the Vikings, you shouldn't be saying, well, just get Mahomes because it's the same situation. Well, that guy is a different breed. He's one in a generation. He's your John Elway or something of this generation, which is probably the closest comparison I can come up with. And even Elway took a lot longer to win. But if you look at the guy who did legendary stuff, who you might be able to get, it's Tua Tagovailoa.
Correct.
Came off the bench as a freshman in a national championship game and played at the highest level in the SEC and put up crazy good numbers. If there's one guy who we're talking about has some, I know that his hip is hurt, but he has athleticism and a leadership quality you really love. This is a guy who threw 87 touchdowns and 11 picks in college.
Mm-hmm.
That I think a lot of Vikings fans were watching that game last night thinking, boy, they should really trade up for Tua.
Well, yeah, and I agree completely. And I think the conversation isn't because you're not going to get Mahomes exactly, all right?
Of course.
Odds are it's not going to happen. But I think there is a fair conversation in where is your franchise going? And you can see that the impact that this new generation of quarterbacks has on this game. And right now for teams, and San Francisco is really good, but they fall into this too. For teams like the Vikings, Niners, it sort of feels like they're driving a 2010 car that's really nice, but the cars have evolved completely and are changing.
They
And
got
they're
the backup camera,
and they're changing
Bluetooth.
and they're changing in a huge fashion, right?
Yeah.
In a huge fashion. So Tua strikes me, and here's what's intriguing. If the medicals come back good, you've got the luxury, and I know it would cost you a ton, but you've got the luxury of he sits behind Kirk for a solid year. And, it helps if Kirk is nice, but if Kirk's not nice, it's not going to be the end of the world. He gets that year to learn, which is a luxury, but I think it's important. And you sort of see the buildup then to 2021, and it's got to seem tempting. It has to at least seem tempting.
Yep. And especially with the mobility aspect of it, of watching the offensive line struggle about as much as you could possibly struggle in that game last night. And I don't have the PFF numbers yet. I don't think that they're up. I'll check again. But for how often he was pressured. But it was an outrageous amount. He was pressured all night long. And yet still finds a way to move, to get away. All right, let's see here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've got the numbers. Give me 1 second. I'll pull it up. And how often he was pressured. Patrick Mahomes was pressured on 21 of 51 dropbacks. And of course, his numbers were not overall great because he took 4 sacks and had picks, but found ways to make plays when he was being pressured half the time in that game.
Right.
And here's the crazier thing. San Francisco only blitzed 7 times. So that means they were putting pressure on him like that with 4 guys. And yet he was able to overcome it in part because of his athleticism, in part because of this baller mentality and confidence that he has.
They succeeded then in doing everything that they did to the Vikings and Packers.
Yes.
The only difference, just a small difference, was the quarterback.
Well, and that's the thing too, is that they faced quarterbacks who hold on to the ball longer than anybody else in the NFL in Cousins and in Aaron Rodgers. And in this world, with edge rushers that are that freakish like Nick Bosa on almost every team, I'm not sure how you could go deep in the playoffs when you know whatever team you're going to face probably has 3 absolute freaks on the defensive line. Unless, even if you have a great offensive line, which Kansas City's is good, not great, but even if you have a great offensive line, they're still going to get mauled by those guys.
Mm-hmm.
Those guys just win and win and win. And that's where you look at it and you go, Kirk is a very, very good quarterback who can probably only get you so far, very similarly to Alex Smith. And there is a fair comparison. Even though you're not going to get Patrick Mahomes, there's a fair comparison to that situation.
I think it's very fair to ask a simple question. Does what the Vikings want to do to be successful translate to a Super Bowl team? With the quarterback, with the scheme, because I think it's a good team. I think this team can win 10 games, 11 games maybe. So I'm not saying that they're not a playoff team. I'm not disparaging them and saying they stink. But I am saying that if your ultimate goal is a Super Bowl and a potential Lombardi trophy, does what they're trying to do in today's game, because today's game has changed, man. Yep. That's just the truth. We watched football 10 years back, and it does not look like football looks now. Does that translate?
The one thing I would say is in the AFC, Patrick Mahomes is Lord King for now and probably will stay in that conversation for a long time. Lamar Jackson, I don't think is going anywhere. I don't think Deshaun Watson is going anywhere. And even guys like Drew Lock might be really good. I don't know. Who knows who the next quarterback who comes up in this draft is? Who knows if Sam Darnold surprises us and is great, or Baker Mayfield, who's a number 1 overall pick. I think that they have a lot of really great quarterbacks in the AFC. In the NFC, the picture is just so much shadier that what we're seeing is kind of like every year some new NFC team pops up. The problem is you were already that team in 2017.
Correct.
And you didn't get there. And now making a roster around Kirk Cousins that's strong enough like that 2017 one was again, I just have a tough time seeing it, especially with where they are with the key players and the ages of them. Like even Harrison Smith, who is making a case for being a Hall of Famer someday, he's 30 years old or 31 years old.
Here's my question, though. My premise is not based so much on quarterbacks and their faults and them not being good. My question is based on the fact that, to me, the way the defenses and the speed have changed is so different now.
Mm-hmm.
You've got ends that come from both ends now. It's not just the right end. You've got guys that are nose tackles who can rush.
Yep.
So my question is, if what San Francisco did defensively, which is in some ways ideal, and that is a ton of pressure with sometimes or lots of times 4 guys. If you're able to do that consistently, does the style of quarterback to whom we had been accustomed, does it work against those teams? Because we saw the Packers do this to Cousins. We saw San Francisco. We saw about 3 or 4 teams. Chicago. And he had, I don't want to say no chance, but it felt like his chances were minimal because A, he was flustered, and B, he didn't know where the pressure was coming from.
So here's a question for you. Could you try to, I think the answer is yes, and the route that they should go, play both sides of the coin. So you look at the NFC next year and you go, all right, San Francisco's probably going to be back. Arizona's going to be better. Seattle is really good. I don't know what's going on with the Saints. I don't know what's going on with Tampa, but both of them are probably good because they've got a lot of talent on those teams. The NFC North is wide open. I don't expect 13 wins out of the Packers next year. I don't know what to think of the Lions. Matt Patricia's probably fired by week 4. Chicago, as long as they have that quarterback, is not a real threat. And the NFC East stinks outside of Philadelphia and Dallas, but Philadelphia, I think, is fading, is falling apart from what they had a couple of years ago. And so you look at this and go, I mean, there's no reason to think that you're not going to be in that conversation again. As a team that just has a lot of talent with 2 of the best receivers in the league, a couple of good tight ends, and still a lot on defense, even if you lose Everson Griffin, you can replace that. Is there a case to say, you know what, let's draft that quarterback in the first round and do whatever we want to do, and then still go for it? Because that's what Kansas City did. When they drafted Mahomes, they didn't say, okay, well, let's go 3-13. No, they kept Alex Smith in place, and they went for it, and it didn't work out for them. And then they turned the ball over to Patrick Mahomes. This position is so important in football and always has for the entire history of the forward pass that all the best quarterbacks win Super Bowls, and except for Dan Marino. But that's, it's like every year you get, every once in a while you get an outlier, but every year it's some great legendary quarterback in the Super Bowl at very least.
Sure.
Right? So why would you not try to upgrade that at all times whenever an opportunity presents itself? So if Tua Tagovailoa passes through the first 10 teams or something, and you're 25th, is there any reason not to take your pick and trade up?
No. If he passes that much, absolutely
because
not.
Even if it blows up in your face, it was still right.
I'd consider trying to go up to get him.
This is what we thought about Sam Bradford. It's a good comparison because even with Sam Bradford, they traded a first. Yeah. And that first turned into a decent edge rusher for Philadelphia.
It was still a good
trade. Didn't make much of a difference outside of he played a good Super Bowl.
And they wisely and rightfully addressed a major problem that was not their fault.
Right.
In Bradford.
Yes.
So
but my point is if they just stick around and draft for the first round pick and they don't trade for Bradford, they're not even slightly competitive. And yet that didn't ruin the franchise. Trading a first round pick for Bradford didn't ruin the franchise.
Do you think that the head coach whose time as far as this job, we don't know how much is left or security, do you think that he would go for that and that they would say to him, too bad? Because the one thing I think, because Zim's an old school football guy, he'd say, we got to address needs immediately. We're trying to win for 2020. But I'm with you. I would say, Mike, we can still be good. We're still going to have plenty of talent.
Yeah.
And we're going to go up and get this kid.